This is a presentation on speech sounds, a world in which you cannot speak because there was a virus unleashed that made everyone mute. However, there are anomalies like children who can speak, and this story was thought of by Octavia Butler. The author is known for her science fiction and for receiving the first MacArthur Award for science fiction. This story was written on Washington Boulevard on a bus during an altercation where she saw between two men. The author began to wonder, because when she saw this altercation, these two men were fighting, began to wonder if there were any other way of speech besides violence by the way these two men fought. And the idea of silent sounds came from this. Life and speech sounds. After the outbreak of the virus, many millions died from issues of the virus, such as the symptoms. Most of the men died. Women had a higher survival rate besides the men. But a lot of men like Obsidian in the story were rare due to his ability to be able to read and write. And there's more women than men in the story, and that's worth mentioning. And those few that could read and write were lucky because they were few among the people who could speak. And later in the story, there's a group of children. The main character, Rye, adopts towards the end of the story after Obsidian gets shot. Why is speech sounds a dystopia? And I had to ask myself this question when writing this video essay. When people often have barriers or often shown by history, we often resort to war over petty conflicts of interest. Take for part land. We fight over land and squares of land during the medieval ages so people could build castles. How ridiculous is that concept? And this was often caused by language barriers. And in this story, you could see that there is language barriers because no one can speak. And only the people that can speak are the children born after the virus is unleashed. And this kind of concept keeps your mind wondering because you're like, what's happening next? What about the people who know sign language? They're not talked about. That's the thing with these type of stories you often see in movies. Or there's a twist or scenario put on, which the author found out. Number 5, summarizing key points of speech sounds. There was an outbreak of the virus, rendered the whole world mute due to an inability to speak. There was often a lot of violence, but those enough using hand gestures to often use hand gestures to communicate. This was like Obsidian. He did this. He was a protector. He had an LAPD uniform, and he tried to protect the people despite several instances of where he couldn't. And there were a lot of bad guys and a lot of good guys. But it's often defined by the patience of the person in the story, because lefties, left-handed people, are often mentioned to be more patient and more better in the society. There's an existing romance between the two main characters, Rye and Obsidian. Indeed, this element makes this one story seem like there is more light in a darkened world. However, Obsidian gets killed in an altercation with a woman and the husband. And this is an important part of the story because the woman may have been teaching her children how to speak. And the man could have been her husband, could have gotten jealous. Or it could have been somebody else who's just jealous of the man. And the children were both scared of Rye, but they learned to trust her. And the focus of the story is Rye has been heading to Pasadena. And this kind of sums up the next point right here. These are all dystopian points, no matter what way you look at it. It's a utopian element in a world of solace, adopting children, but the society is still dystopian. One story does not fix an entire society. because in the society, the government has collapsed. There's no police, and the story states that. There was also an outbreak of the virus, and it seems like the virus stopped in the story. But that is a dystopian element, such as a zombie virus. And there's an existing romance in the story between two characters, but it seems like a utopian feel, but once the character dies, it kind of goes back to the grim reality that, well, shows that the story was a dystopia. There are two ways in which people respond in Silent Sound with violence on the Washington Boulevard bus in which the story takes place. They often use peaceful hand gestures, and to give a sense of speech in a mute world. And it can often be for violence sometimes too. But the story taken from the Washington Boulevard was taken from that earlier story where the author began to wonder if there was any other way to stop violence besides not speaking. And in the story, there were often characters like Obsidian who were rare for their ability to read and write. The author or the main character, Rai, fell in love with Obsidian and during the romance, and later he gets killed. That's kind of gotten her out of a phase of depression in the story. The character is depressed, but she finds solace in the children. A silent thesis. In Silent Sound, there is an idea of dystopia by introducing many people are mute, but this raises many questions. What is the origin of the virus? Why only children seem to be unaffected? And a sense of timeline to explain the collapse of a society. And these are all important questions to answer, such as the first one. The origin of the virus would have to come from somewhere. So I'm guessing since this is happening in Pasadena, this is going to be in the US. And I mentioned the Soviets were also affected, so I'm guessing this virus sprouts up somewhere in America. I'm not going into that too deep because of COVID and current world events, but I can also mention that the children in the story briefly mentioned are safe because they were born after the virus ran its course initially. And this story is taking place years after the virus takes place, and that leads me to my third question. What was the timeline of the breakout, and how has society collapsed? Because the story mentions that there's no police officers and firefighters, but why is it? Why is that case? Because one could only theorize how that society collapsed and why it was not able to recover. Fundamentally, that means anarchy and there is no government. But a better question is, why did these institutions fail? And that was due to the virus. But why did the people that survived fail? Where's the government? What happened? You can't just have that amount of stuff just disappear for no reason. And why was the author on a bus? These are questions we do not know. We do know that she was heading to Pasadena, that's why she was on the bus. But we do not know why the bus system is still operating. Why isn't the police stations not operating? The dystopian society of speechless sound. In the story Silent Sound, the narrator has introduced the idea of dystopia. This harkens back to the idea of her on the bus. However, this story does offer hope and a utopian idea that family can still exist in a society like this. But the collapse of society still reveals this to be a dystopia, because the collapse of the society is a dystopian reality itself. A silent idea. Closing notes. I find that this story reveals a hidden component, and this proposes a philosophical question. Why is our first instinct violence? Why do we not see that petty conflicts create senseless destruction? Yet, why do we not look past these things to look at the inner humanity that... Why is our first instinct violence? Why do we not see that petty conflicts create senseless destruction? Yet, why do we not look past these things to look at the humanity that each of us have inside? There are questions that this dystopia poses by focusing on the bad within our society to make us question the idea of our humanity. The idea of our humanity. We question it. We think about it. And why do we want to go for violence in this world? Why do we seek senseless conflict? That is the question that this story focuses on, implying, using diction, helping to explain something through the use of words rather than words of the writing, but also the actions of the story, to explain a greater idea of what our humanity truly can be. Credits, speech sound by Octavia Butler.